On est prêt? On est prêt, on est prêt? Ah oui, là c'est mieux. Retour. Un, deux, retour. C'est bon? Ok. We are streaming. Streaming now. Okay, hello everyone. People coming back. Okay, so we will start now. So I am Ben of Silicium. Silicium is a retro computing collection in the south of France, in Toulouse. And I will give a talk about how to do 16-bit graphics or graphics on 16-bit era computers, so Atari Amiga and so on. For newcomers to the demo scene, people who can do modern graphics, like on Photoshop, and we would like to understand or know the difference with old school pixel graphics, full screen graphics, sprites, and so on. So the kind of things we want to do is this kind of graphics. This was Deluxe Paint. So this will be, as an introduction, a gallery of software and the kind of pictures that could be done with this generation of computers. So Deluxe Paint on the Amiga 1000, the original Amiga. Deluxe Paint again. Screen resolutions in the lower left. And I don't get a cursor. Deluxe Paint, a more modern version again, with more screen resolutions. Brilliance, an alternative. We'll go over this again for more modern Amigas. High resolution Deluxe Paint again on more modern Amigas. Neochrome on the Atari ST. We'll go into more details of those as well. And Degas Elite, one of the original paint programs on the Atari. Many colors at the same time on the Atari that was not possible in hardware, but thanks to demo coding tricks, this can be done. This one had interesting drafting tools that came to other software much later. We'll go over this again also. And this is what you can use today on modern computers to do old school graphics. Graphics 2 is probably the best solution. So let's go into many more details about all of that so that you will know what to choose and what to use. So why are we talking about 16-bit computers? It's because it's more interesting graphically, visually than the 8-bit computers. It's because those 16-bit computers, they had real frame buffers. They were not constrained by tiles and character modes and so on. And also they had an arbitrary palette that actually had full RGB red, green, blue components. So not like the 6 colors of the first color personal computer that was the Apple II in 1977, but it had exactly 6 colors and only those 6 colors. So no palette. And Commodore 64 has the annoyance of having a particular hue in its colors, so it doesn't have access to the full red, green, blue spectrum. So all C64 colors, pictures, I mean, have a specific color tone to them that is immediately recognizable. Also, there were, on 8-bit computers, there was the problem of economical or shoddy adaptations to non-American video standards, like the Atari VCS, the first gaming console that was really popular. They had many colors in NTSC and only 8 ugly colors when the console was sold in France and adapted for SECAM. And also, the other things we have, thanks to the full frame buffer and real palette, we don't have adjacency constraints or color clash, which is when the color of a pixel constrains what can be displayed in the surrounding pixels. You don't have that kind of constraint, so you can do arbitrary pictures on an Atari or Amiga or these machines. Also, we finally had mouse as standard, and the first good touch tablets for real graphic artists who actually want to draw on the computer. So the machines that are of interest to us, they are the Atari computers, of course, the 16-bit Atari computers and Amiga. the original Amiga and the AGA Amigas that had much better graphics chipset. And the PCs, they didn't have good graphics at the beginning. But by the time we got VGA and MCGA, it was finally okay with enough colors and so on. And I know that the Apple IIgs also was good for graphics. I guess the Archimedes from England was good as well. And also we know that machines like the X68000, the Fujitsu FM10s and so on, they also had excellent color graphics. There were some of the early PCs that had usable graphics modes with usable colors if you knew what to do. So CGA PC, as long as you connect to a composite monitor and not a TTL monitor. Tandy 1000, that was inexpensive but had actually good color graphics. And EGA PCs, the problem they had is that in low resolution, you had a fixed palette with vivid and fairly horrible colors. No ways to do a gradient or anything like that. So that's why even the LucasArts games, despite the excellent graphic artists, they look like crap on EGA PC. So the technical details. So this one is especially for Callisto, so that she will know what to configure in Photoshop or graphics too. The first thing is what we used, well, most people call the screen resolution, which is not at all the resolution, it's the definition of the screen. So your typical demo-oriented definition would be 320 by 200 pixels in NTSC mode, and 320 by 256 in PAL mode, so European mode. So actually 320 by 200 is fairly popular on mini computers because this is also the fixed resolution of the Atari ST. That's also what you get in CGA if you actually want more than 2 colors. That's also convenient for VGA, for performance on the PC and so on. On the Amiga, you can actually configure pretty much what you want. You can literally define your resolution in software, so you have much more flexibility. The consoles of the time, they also had interesting graphics, so that's why we get good demos also on 16-bit consoles. The resolutions were similar, and one peculiarity were screen modes when the width of the screen was only 256, so that is it's exactly 1 byte instead of 2 bytes. So for performance in a game and so on, that's interesting. So that's why they have those hardware modes. So that could be what is chosen by a demo coder and that the graphic artist will have to conform to. And the other important thing to consider with those screen definitions, and this time it has to do with resolution, which is how many pixels per unit size of screen you get. It's that in most of those modes, your pixels are not square. So if you set one resolution like this in Photoshop, on your screen square pixel screen on your modern computer, a circle will be a circle. When you project that on those old computers, the circle is no longer a circle because the pixels are not square. So you have to make sure that you configure the proper aspect ratio in your modern software so that a circle is actually a circle. Finally, there's the question of overscan. Some computers could do that directly, so they are not constrained, strictly speaking, by those, say, 320 by 200 screen definition. On some machines, it was possible, but it took a lot of work in software by glitching the hardware, essentially. So again, it will be the programmer, the coder of the demo who will decide what is the actual resolution that the graphic artist will have to conform to. For those who are interested, I put everything that's in blue. Those are clickable links on the referenced material. Similarly, an example of a demo Punisher machine that has extremely impressive screens for the Atari ST with full screen hardware scrolling, high color, so additional colors that we will explain in the next slide. And also keep in mind that typically in the palette, color 0 is also the borders of the screen around the frame buffer. So that has to be also carefully chosen by the graphic artists. In many cases, it will be black, but the coder and the graphic artist have to agree on what will be the background color around the picture. So then how does it work in practice, and why do we get the numbers of colors that we get? It's because those computers, they did not have red, green, blue per pixel. They had color planes, bit planes, sorry, and entries into a color palette. And it is the size of the color palette that's limited by the number of bits per pixel, so the number of bit planes. There are other interesting aspects of bit planes, again, that have to do with animation and so on. So that's to be discussed again with the programmer for a demo. So on the Atari ST, bit planes were interleaved, and they are independent on the Amiga, which is why there can be interesting color animation effects, and I will show an example of that. I didn't watch the time, so maybe you should keep. Oh crap, 15 minutes already. So yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is the difference between those bit plane oriented graphics modes and what they had as an example on PC with VGA, which is called a chunky display, where each byte is a single pixel, and that's more convenient for animation and so on. It has a benefit in performance, but it was more complicated to do in hardware, which is why this is not what we have on the earliest 16-bit computers. There are still some complications on PCs, because essentially the only thing you can access efficiently is one window of 64 kilobyte, which is again why the low resolution mode of VGA with 320 by 200 is interesting. It's because it fits in one 64 kilobyte page. If you want to higher resolution, it doesn't fit, and that's slower to program, to animate. So the number of colors that we get, and how many components, so what is the accuracy of, say, a gradient, is dependent on what is the content of the color palette. So say on the Atari ST, you get 3 bits or 8 levels per red and green blue components, which is why we have some number of colors, but to be chosen among 512 colors on the Atari ST. And the STE that was improved, enhanced, had 4 bits per channels, per color channel, so they had 4,000 colors. And the Amiga also had 4,000 colors from the very beginning. And the improved AGA Amigas had 6 bits, so 64 levels instead of 16 levels per colors, hence the total of 260,000 colors, which was actually better than, say, the early color laptops that usually had only 5 or 6 bits per channels in order to fit in a 16-bit pixel. So on the Amiga, it was a bit better than that. EGA, on high resolution modes, you could choose an arbitrary color palette, but only among 64 colors. So again, gradients are extremely limited, since you have on one channel, you have black, dark, and then 2 intermediate levels, and then your bright red or green or blue. So again, that's not very, very progressive. The Amstrad CPC had this particularity that it had also black, or full brightness for one color, or just half brightness. So only 3 levels per colors, and so 16 colors on screen in low resolution to be chosen among only 27 colors. So that's again why we get very, very vivid and displays on the Amstrad, and not gradients. There are particular cases for high resolution modes. Sometimes it can be used artistically. There are actually black and white demos that can be quite impressive. They usually have a very specific mood to them. So that's what you had on the Mac, of course, and the Atari had that in a high resolution mode. And it's not to be confused with those cases of 2-color screens, modes, but where the colors are still colors as opposed to black and white. So that's something you can do on the Amiga. You can save graphics memory by having only 1 bit plane, but that is still with a palette of 2 colors if you want that. And the links at the bottom of the screen, they are collections of reference palettes for machines where you actually have constraints, so that you can set a correct palette in your modern graphics software if you want to do old school graphics with modern programs. So in summary, what you get, the last important parameter is how large is the palette. So on the Atari ST, the highest number of colors you could get in the lowest screen resolution was 16 colors, so 4 bits per pixels. On the Amiga, you had up to 32 colors, up to 5 bits per pixel, but you can actually program how many you have. So it can also be a 2-color mode and up to 32 colors. There is a special mode on the Amiga that has been used in recent demos. It was complicated to create good graphics for this mode with old software, but now people have made good converters. And so you can use this mode called Hold and Modify that can display all 4,000 colors of the Amiga all at once. But there are actually, in this case, there are adjacency constraints. That is, 1 pixel can change the colors with respect to the previous pixel with limitations. And there is another interesting mode on the Amiga, which is the extra half bright mode, where you can actually have 64 colors, but it's 32 colors, but you usually choose as fairly bright colors. And the other 32 colors, they are not additional entries in the color palette because there are no more than 32 entries in the color palettes, but they will be the entries of the palette with brightness halved, divided by 2. So typically you set the palette with fairly bright colors and you get the dark colors as half of the entries in the palette. And on AGA Amigas, you actually have a 256 color palette, like was typical in particular on VGA low resolution. On CGA, you get only 4 colors if you use a TTL monitor, but if you use composite video, you actually get 16 colors with a reasonable choice. So AGA, we already mentioned. You get arbitrary colors, 16 colors in high resolution EGA, but in low resolution, you have only a fixed palette, also 16 colors, but fixed. So especially on EGA, it's going to be hard to do dithering or anti-aliasing since you don't get an arbitrary selection of colors to do anti-aliasing. And so of course the best mode of all of those before 1990 would be typically VGA or MCGA on specifically IBM PCs from IBM, where you get the full 256 colors. So one interesting trick that you can do, since the actual RGB values are not in the frame buffer, is that if you change the palette on the fly, you just change a few bytes and you completely change the picture. So they did that in games in order to save disk space by having the same picture with a different palette to set different times of the day. So this is quite interesting. And you can note in particular the lit windows in the tower. They are not really visible in the day picture. And so it's just a few pixels that use the yellow entry of the palette just for this. So it has to be a careful choice of the graphic artist from the very beginning when they draw a picture with this intent. So I don't know if we will have time for all of this. I have examples on what to do and how to do palette cycling. Personally, I'm a fan of palette cycling because impressive stuff can be done. There are excellent examples on those websites from Jim Sachs, who is the graphic artist for the game that we were showing, and Mark Ferrari, who did graphics for many of the LucasArts games, like Monkey Island, Loom, where he invented a lot of techniques for doing essentially dithering by hand, because they didn't have that in the graphics programs from back then. And he also then later on went to do screensavers in particular that do color cycling, so that the screensaver is not working the computer hard, so that the computer can avoid consuming a lot of CPU power, purely by doing palette cycling. So I encourage you to go and see those examples on this viewer, on this website. So this should be animated if I do this. So at the bottom, you can see the water. The animation is done entirely by palette cycling. And here, same thing. Palette cycling, and you can see the rotation of the colors in the palette at the bottom right. And then now you can see a much smoother mode. It is still only palette cycling. there's no mixing of the successive pictures. It's just that the entries of the palette are changed with intermediate values, very fine intermediate values, but there is nothing then changing the colors. There's no animation in this picture. Another case of using palette tricks is the original Boeing Ball demo on the Amiga. That's quite legendary. So again, this thing is absolutely not drawing big sprites with the blitter or anything like that. It's purely a palette trick. So I put an explanation. I will try to make that understandable for everyone. We'll see if that works. So the thing to remember is that of the 32 colors, the 32 colors will be combined in a way where 14 colors, 14 different entries of the color palette are used for the red and white Boeing ball. So the point is to have 7 successive stripes, vertical stripes, that do the apparent rotation of the Boeing ball. So in each square, so maybe you remember what this looks like. In each square, there will be actually 7 successive shifts of the squares. So let's have a look at the details of how that works. So yeah, it's going to be hard to see the numbers, so I will probably skip this. You can actually look at the slides later on. So the point is to get this, and if I run this here, you can see that this is actually jumping in steps. Well, there are 7 such steps. And you can see one band that's slightly darker. That's actually on purpose. This one has different value. And this corresponds to what you see here. So there will be colors here and here that serve for the background. So the grid on the background, this one, and then the area that's in the shadow. And the ball itself will be those 14 colors here and here. And you can see the palette rotation, sorry. The palette rotation, if I show this to you, you can see how the entries are changed in turn. And this is what gets the apparent rotation. Because here, as an example, in this red square, there are actually several bands that are all red, except every time it shifts by one of the color will go from red to white and vice versa. And this is how the bands are successively red squares or white squares. And so if you regroup, and this combines with the background, so this is what is explained here by making apparent why you need here, in this case, in this trick, you need to duplicate the color palette entries. So 14 here and 14 here again, that do the same thing. It's because they still combine with the bit plane of the background when the ball is moving over the background. So essentially, the reason why you need 2 colors, 2 entries, I mean, from the palette. So as an example, for one stripe, it's going to be entries 2 and 18. So number 2 here and 18 here, and they will be the same color. It's because they combine with what is in the background bit plane that still has either the background color or the color of the grid. And you want to ignore this. So here, when the ball is over something that is either the background or here, if we follow the line, it will actually be color number 1 that comes from the grid. I mean, sorry, color 16, that's here, because it is the most significant bit of the color entries. You actually want those 2 colors, 2 and 18, depending on whether the ball is over the background or over the grid, you still want that to be the same color. So that's why you need to duplicate those palette entries. So you have to do essentially a bit of binary arithmetic to properly understand what it is you try to achieve when you do those combinations of an object moving on top of in this case, 2-color monochrome background. So now let's see the graphics programs that we had back then and that are still interesting to use today, in my opinion anyway. Again, with many references to scans of articles. If you want to know more, read the tests of those old programs and make an idea for yourself before starting to use those programs, before going through the effort of setting them up in an emulator and so on. So one of the ancient ones that, the early ones on the Atari ST is Degas, quickly followed by Degas Elite. And then Spectrum 512 that was able to display all 512 colors of the Atari ST all at once in a single high color picture. All of that was done by a genius programmer by the name of Tom Hudson that we later have known for, in particular, 3D Studio and 3D Studio Max. So he invented a lot of techniques back then. And Atari themselves, they did Neochrome that also used those palette tricks in order to display all the choices of the palette on screen, like we have seen on a screenshot at the beginning. And another interesting program is ZZROF. The advantage of this one is that it may be one of the early ones on popular computers, not high-end graphic workstation, to have tools like that look like real drawing tools with smearing, with dithering, and so on. So like a bit like what you have with the brushes in Photoshop nowadays. It also had layers that was new back then, in particular because of memory constraints. Another one that had also high colors was GFR Artists by the same company that we owe the most popular BASIC interpreter on the Atari and Amiga back then. There are a few other interesting ones. And the one thing that you want to look up is a reference of the picture formats, again, in order to be able to convert those pictures. On the Amiga, there is the famous original reveal demo of the Amiga 1000 with Andy Warhol painting Debbie Harry from the band Blondie with those very recognizable effects. He used for that Graphic Craft, and the other available one back then was ProPaint. They were ports of 8-bit software on the Amiga, on the brand new back then Amiga. They were very limited. Apparently it's still possible to find them, and therefore it would be interesting to see what people could do today with those very old programs with their very limited tools. See if you guys can do better than Andy Warhol. There's also an interesting story behind Aegis Animator that was good if you wanted to do like sprites and so on. And of course the one that everyone knows is Deluxe Paint. There are successive versions that took advantage of the AGA Amiga, but the original one, Deluxe Paint 1 and 2, are the ones that everyone knows. They are the ones that were used by the LucasArts graphic artists for making the still images that we have in those all those LucasArts games. Again, like Monkey Island, Loom, Zack McCracken, and the Alien Main Benders, and so on. And Photon Paint is probably one of the early painters that can actually use the whole and modified mode of the Amiga in order to draw with all 4,000 colors all at once. And on the PC, what was popular at the beginning maybe was PC Paintbrush, to which we owe the PCX format that was fairly popular next to GIF and in the beginning. On the Atari, the interesting one that you want to use if you actually want to draw on the Atari is Neochrome Master. It's a hacked version of the original Neochrome from a disassembly by a demo coder, Chaos Inc. from the group Delta Force. And he added quite a lot of features, much more modern features, which is why this program came in late in the life of the, pretty much at the end of the life of the Atari ST. But it's really the one you want to use if you want to paint on the Atari ST directly. And on the Amiga, if you want something more modern than Deluxe Paint, then you should definitely have a look at Brilliance. That can also use ham modes in addition to palette modes. And they can benefit from additional graphics cards for higher resolution, but that's not really interesting for demo coding. And there are a few more, and one that is still maintained and developed to nowadays. I believe that the latest version is just 2 or 3 years ago. Is Personal Paint, and there are a few more. And on the PC, the popular one was probably Paint Shop Pro. The other thing that you want to pay attention to, or that you want to have in your toolkit if you want to paint in an emulator or on the real hardware, are packers, of course, for converting your pictures for use in a size-limited demo, and image converters. So those are the formats that you want to be able to handle. IFF on the Amiga, that was used by everyone, that was introduced by Deluxe Paint. On the Atari, PI1 is the format from Degas Elite and Neo from Neochrome. Of course, on the PC, you would typically do GIF or PCX. Targa is very convenient, easy to convert because it's a flat format, uncompressed. The header is very simple, so loading, I mean, a Targa image is like 5 or 10 lines of code, of C code. Of course, it's still convenient if you use modern software to do all graphics, to use PNG, because PNG has transparency. All those old formats, they don't have a notion of transparency. In the best case, transparency will be color 0 of your color palette. And for conversion of those old formats, you may have to use fairly old software libraries, so typically command lines, like NetPBM, a descendant of P3. No, that's good. PBM Plus, it's an old project from the 80s. ImageMagick, same story, and Utah Rally, Utah Raster Toolkit, that is now not maintained anymore. But in case you don't find a given format in the in NetPBM or ImageMagick, you may have a look at Utah Raster Toolkit for support of really ancient formats, because it's a really ancient library. Of course, sometimes you still want to have a touch of 3D, so you can try and use a 3D modeler from back then. But the talk was more about 2D graphics painted by hand. Still, if you want to do ray tracing, of course, everyone knows persistence of vision. It's actually a descendant of an Amiga program called the DKB Trace, by the name of the author. An interesting aspect, if you want to have a landscape background for a scene, you could use a fractal landscape generator. Probably the most well-known one is Vista and Vista Pro on the Amiga. Usually you don't need, since you have a full screen frame buffer, an arbitrary frame buffer, you don't need to do tiles and tile maps. But that can be that's of course something you still want if you do a game, or if you want to do a game for a game compo in a demo party. And it was fairly common back then to write your own software, to write your own converters and so on. And that's where those old computers were. All you had to do is start your basic interpreter, and you could do what you wanted with just a few lines. Getting the position of the mouse and a click on the mouse button. You didn't have to program complicated event loops and so on. So again, with not a lot of lines of code, you could do a small painting program or specialized tools. And this is in particular how this madman Eric Chahi created another world all by himself in about 1.5 years, with a bit of rotoscoping and painting with his own tools, and converting his pictures and animations with his own basic programs. Insane. So if you want to use modern software on your PC or Mac, whatever, for drawing old style, you could do that in Photoshop, because you can still use a palette mode in Photoshop. But if you want to draw in the style of Deluxe Paint and so on, the one you want to use is Graphex 2, because it really has the kind of tools that you had in Deluxe Paint and those programs. It still has conveniences like you have layers, you have unlimited undo, you can do animation like a flip book by moving in quick successions between your frames. You have palette animation that was already a thing in Deluxe Paint and in Neochrome, not in the Degas Elite, if I remember correctly. So yeah, you can set multiple ranges in your palette. I will show that. I will show examples of that, what it looks like. You can do, you can set ranges of the palette where you will have an animation of the palette directly as you paint. So you will see the animated effect that you try to create, and what are the pixels that are at sometimes the same color, so that you don't distinguish them, and then through the animation, they lit up because you set a different color. So you want the animation to play all the time. Otherwise, you would not know which pixels are different entries in the color palette if they actually have the same color in multiple places of the palette in some of your animation states. There are excellent tutorials on how to use Graphics 2 by Pixel Outlaw on YouTube. And the other interesting one that has excellent support for sprites, for palette-oriented graphics and so on is Promotion by a guy called Cosmigo. Some people, of course, use Procreate on the iPad because it's very convenient with the stylus, and they also have support for the palette. If you want to do specifically sprites, the ones maybe to recommend are Pixen and Azeprite. They used to be, those two used to be open source software, but now they are commercial. But yeah, they have been greatly improved, so maybe that's worth it. There are a few old school pixel art online editors, and frankly, they are mostly crap. They are extremely incomplete, extremely feature limited, contrived, so really not very great in my opinion, not yet at least. Also, most of them are actually commercial, not open source, which means that you cannot really modify them. Lunapeak is open source. This one, at least, the first one, is actually commercial. Bibliography of interesting sources if you want to learn about those old programs or how to use them. So reviews of the programs or tutorials. You find that in old magazines, and you find those old magazines scanned as an example on those websites. So many individual articles are available on Obligement, coming from Atari and Amiga French magazines, essentially. Abandonware Magazines is also a collection of French magazines for many computers. So those are the ones for the Atari and Amiga. Atari Magazines is an American site that has scans of antique magazines, Start Magazine, where also you will find many reviews of those old programs. Actually, on the previous slides, everything you can click about those old programs are essentially articles from those magazines. The last one site is an excellent gallery of programs and screenshots and the effects that can be created with those old painters and also with the technique of palette cycling. So yeah, I'll go back quickly to show you what it looked like to do palette cycling with Graphics 2. So this is, sorry, I don't get a mouse cursor for some reason. Okay, whatever. So main screen on the right, you have your actual picture with on the split screen, the magnifier that you usually want to use in order to do essentially anti-aliasing by hand and so on, because that's how it was done back then. You do get some anti-aliased, as an example, line tool on Graphics 2 that you didn't have back then. But when you want to do large areas, this is still done pretty much by hand, by alternating pixels from the color palette. So typically, how you draw with these is still like what they do in Photoshop. You set the two colors for your two mouse buttons, or the tap of the stylus on your touch tablet and the side button. And then you alternate between those two in order to do one gradient on color, and then you switch to another pair of colors, and you do another area of your picture. And when you want to do some animation, as opposed to gradients, this is the screenshot on the bottom left, where you see the palette with as many entries as you configured, and you can set small sliders that define the ranges where the colors will rotate in succession. So this is why it's called cycling. A given range, so sorry, I don't get a mouse cursor for some reason. A given range of the palette, so let me show you here, sorry. So you will set, say, a given range here or one here, and when you play the palette cycling, the colors in this range will just be permutated circularly, and so you will see the effect on your picture as you draw. You still get all your tools, it's just a background task. So now we reach the conclusion. So in summary, in my opinion, what you want to use, the programs you want to use, either you want to use your modern computer to draw old school, so you really want to use Graphics 2 or Promotion. And you have to be careful about the color palette. So there are ways to tell those programs which actual conversion of the RGB values that you have in the program, what they should look like on screen, so that what you get on your modern PC display will actually look like what those red, green, blue values look like on the old computer. Because typically your what's it called, your gamma would be the same on your modern monitor and on an old school computer. Of course, it also depends on the monitor you would use back then on the old computer, but still, you have to be careful about that. And depending on the machine you use, like if you use some of the old consoles, because of hardware limitations, they have some red, green, blue values that actually don't work, like the Super NES has this. Some of the red, green, blue values don't work, and so you have to set a very specific palette. Well, you can find some websites that has collections of those palettes. If you want to draw on all machines, on the Atari, definitely go with Neochrome Master. On the Amiga, probably still Deluxe Paint or Brilliance or Personal Paint because it's more modern. On the PC, PaintShop Pro. And I would want to know the opinion of real artists about all programs that had innovative drawing tools for back then, like ZZRough. And also, it would be interesting. I mean, we don't see a lot of true colors except this revival of old and modified demos on the Amiga in the last 2 or 3 years. We don't get a lot of high color demos, so maybe that would be something to revisit. And also, there is not really a good compo category for palette cycling, because that's not really animation. It's still a file. I mean, there are file formats that can represent the animation of the palette. So, I mean, you can always enter old school animation, but of course, you would be at a disadvantage against real animations. An executable graphics viewer could, of course, run the palette animation. Why not? But then it's not still graphics anymore. So that's something to be discussed, I think, with with compo categories. And the one thing I didn't have time to do in time for the demo party is build hard disk images ready to run in an emulator with those interesting programs. So if someone wants to do and share that, that would be great. And otherwise, maybe I will be doing that for next year. So that's it for this presentation. Thank you very much, everyone. And have a nice party. Enjoy the party. To ask if people at the assembly had questions. So Deluxe Paint in JavaScript in the browser? That's what it is? No, I didn't know about this one. So yeah, I will have a look because the ones I found as online editors are not great. So okay, and this one is good in your opinion? Okay, so Deluxe Paint, dpaint.js, Deluxe Paint online. Questions or comments? Okay, that's it. Thank you, everyone.